The next thing we have to work on then is our new and edit functions. So we're going to need to go take a look at our save and our update functions, which will be a little bit more complicated. To be able to actually get to those, because of the authentication we put in a previous example, I'm going to need to go ahead and log in. So let me go ahead and log in as an administrator of our little site here. There we are, I'm logged in, and now I can get over to the new page. All right, so it's going to be the new page that's actually going to end up calling this save function. The new page should itself be able to properly go through the process of gathering the colors from the user, and based on the validation that's occurring and the false values that are returned, those sorts of things, should be able to handle the communication with the user. All we should really have to worry about here in the save function is how to actually take the data that we have available in a color object and to actually store it to the database. So let's take a look at what we need to change here in order to make the save function work with our database. For starters, the loading of all the colors no longer needs to happen. Instead, now we could start off just by calling validate, and then if the color is valid, that's where we would then be ready to go on and start storing the data in the database. So it's at that point where I might want to call my initdb function to make sure I actually have a working database connection. The next little bit that we had here in the save function previously from working with the flat file was where we went through and generated a unique ID, basically figured out what the next ID to be used would be. We don't really need that anymore since the database basically takes care of setting up our database for us, or takes care of setting up our ID for us. Instead, what I'm going to want to do there is I'm going to want to put together a SQL statement to actually take the data that's in my color object and to then store that data into the database. So from my static database connection, I'm again going to prepare a statement. I'm using prepare again because there's going to be data that I'm going to want to substitute into the statement itself. I'm going to say insert into colors, and then like we were doing before, there's going to be a list of field names and there's going to be a list of actual values. The fields that I'm going to want to insert the data into are going to be the name field, the red value field, the green value field, and the blue value field. I'm not inserting a data into ID. That will be figured out automatically for me by the database. And then over here where the actual values go, I could use my named placeholders there. So I'm going to tell it I'm going to have a placeholder called name, a placeholder called red value, placeholder called green value, and a placeholder called blue value. And all I need to do then is fill out a associative array with those 4 values in it to be then fed into this SQL statement, which is the next thing I'm going to want to do. So when I call my prepare statement here, that's going to prepare a statement for me. So I'll save that in a variable. And then for that statement, I'm going to call the execute function. The execute function is going to expect to get an array, and this array is where I want to then put in the actual values that I want to have stored in my database. So I'm going to say for the name, put in the value of this object's name. For the red value, store the value of this object's red value. For the green value, store the value of this object's green value. And then finally for the blue value, let's store the value of this object's blue value. So what I'm doing is I'm putting together an associative array. So I'm putting together the key name, and then for the actual value, there should be a $sign there. I'm saying go to this object. This object is the object that's currently being saved, and I'm saying access its name. When I say access its name, what it's going to do is it's actually going to use the get function, passing it name as the value of the name variable here. It's not errors that I'm looking for here, so what it'll then do is it will look for the key of name in the attributes array for this object, and that's what it'll give me back. The name itself was actually put in back up here in the constructor when we passed an associative array to the constructor. That name was what was actually then put into through the set function here into the associative array called attributes. One thing you might wonder if you're thinking about it is why not just take the attributes array itself and pass that directly to the execute function. My execute function, where I'm putting together an associative array here that has name, red value, green value, blue value in it, why not use the attributes array itself? Well, the only reason that I'm not is because that's not what the attributes array was intended for. There's the possibility in my mind in the future that the attributes array could potentially have other values stored in it as well, not simply the values that are stored in this particular table of the database. colors. Even a good example of that is the fact that the attributes array has in it the ID for a color, which I think we set as a default to 0. And here I'm specifically not wanting to pass an ID. I'm wanting the database to come up with the ID itself. So that's the reason why I'm actually putting together a new associative array here instead of using the attributes array which already exists. All right, once that actually happens, once I've actually executed that statement so that hopefully my new color gets inserted into my database, what I'm going to want to do at that point is I'm going to want to confirm that that new color was actually created. I should be able to do that by checking the actual row count from that statement. If it has one row in it, then that should mean that the statement succeeded. So let me go to my statement, let me check its row count. And if it's equal to exactly 1, then at that point we should be able to assume that everything worked correctly. Let me go ahead and get rid of these couple statements here, which I don't believe we need. Here we are. Let's work from there. So if row count equals 1, then that then means that the color was successfully saved. If the color has been successfully saved, then what I want to do is I want to get into my color object itself, the ID for this object that's being saved. I want to get in the ID that's actually being used. So let me go to my database connection, and from my database connection, let me call the last insert ID function, which should tell me the ID number of the last color, the last record that was inserted using this connection. So basically asking the database, tell me what the ID number is that you just assigned to that color. I'll then save it here. We need that ID as part of the color so that the new page then knows whose show page to redirect to. So that ought to do the trick. And then after that, I'll go ahead and return true. So at a first pass, that's what I think we probably need for the save function. We'll go test it, of course, but running through it again, basically what happens is we show the new page to the user fills in colors, they submit fill in color data, I should say. They submit that color data, the new page turns that color data into a color object, and then for that color object we call the save function. We tell the object to validate itself. If the object is valid, we then open a connection to our database. Once we have the connection to our database open, or we're sure that it's open, we put together an insert statement. We then take the values from this object that we're asking to have saved, and we execute that statement using those values. We then check to make sure that the data was actually saved. If it was, we get the ID for the new color, and then we return true. If we couldn't, or if we didn't have a row count of 1, if we don't have one color that was inserted, then we return false so the new page can then let the user know that there was actually an error. So with that save function in place, I guess we can jump back over to the browser now and see if that actually works. Back over in the browser, if I refresh the new page, well, we're not starting off too well. Line 100 of my color class looks like I'm missing a parenthesis. So line 100 of my color class right here, who would have ever guessed I could lose a parenthesis in that big nasty looking statement? I've got an open parenthesis for the execute, an open parenthesis for the array, and then over here at the end it looks like I have a close for both of the two. So they are balanced. There must be something else in here that's wrong. Oh, look at this. I put a space right here between the equal and the greater than. That's almost surely confusing things. Let me take out that space, go back to the browser, refresh again. Yep, that's what it was a little space between the equal and the greater than on that hash rocket operator. All right, if I try to save a blank color, looks like my validation is still working like it should. Try and create a color with just a name. It's still flagging incomplete entries. Let me go ahead and fill in some other data, try and make a complete entry here, and if I hit save at that point, it looks like it worked. We have the color with the name and the code that I entered. It tells me a new color was created, and that certainly looks right. If I go back to my index page, the new color is actually showing up there. If I really wanted to confirm that everything is working correctly, I could at this point jump back over to my workbench. Here in the workbench, if I again execute my select all from colors, I can see that, yeah, sure enough, a new color was entered into the database that has the values that I provided through my new form. It was automatically given an ID of 4. Everything looks like it worked beautifully. So I think we now have the ability to create new records in our database through our new form. So things are going pretty well. All right, back over to home again. Let's talk about editing next. I'm going to go to the edit page for that new color that I just created. Here it is, and let's take a look at the update function in our color class and see if we can get it working as well. So here's the update function for my color class. What it's doing right now, or the basic way you can imagine that it's working, is that the user will supply updated data for a color. So we pass it the data that we want to update the color with. So we already have a color object that has data in it. We then pass it some more data. When we have that new data that we pass to update, we take that data here and we actually store it in the object itself. So the updated data gets stored in the object itself. So by the time I get to this line, what for me is line 117 right here, by the time I get to this line, what I'm dealing with is an object that has updated data stored in it. What we were doing before was we were loading all of our colors, which we don't need to do anymore. We then validate this particular color, and then if the color was validated, we saved all of the colors. I think what we're going to want to do here instead is, if the color is valid, this is the point where we're then going to want to run a query in order to actually update the data in the database itself. So at this point, let me go ahead and do self db-init, or it was initdb, wasn't it? Call my function to initialize my database connection. And then I'm going to want to put together a query to actually update the data. So I'm going to do something like self db, and I'm again going to do a prepared statement for the safety that's in it. The prepared statement itself is going to need to look something like update colors set, and then I'm going to need to put in a set of values that I want. So I'm going to need to do something like, say, set name equal to, and I can use named placeholders here. So set name equal to name, set red value equal to red value, named placeholder for red value, set green value equal to a named placeholder for green value, and set blue value equal to a named placeholder for blue value. And the last thing I want to make sure I don't forget to do with this is I'm going to say do that where, and I need to tell it where the ID is equal to a particular ID, so a named placeholder for that as well. So with this SQL statement, I'm telling it that we're updating a color that's already in the database. The color that we want to update has this ID. If I were to forget and leave that part out, what would actually end up happening is I'd end up making this update to every color in my database table, which is certainly not what I want. So what the actual updates that I'm saying to take place is I'm saying change blue value to this, green value to this, red value to this, and the name to that. With all of that then, that should go ahead and update the data that's already in the database for me. Next thing I'm going to need to do then is I'm going to save that as a statement, and then I can execute that statement with my execute function, and I'm going to need to pass that an array that has the updated values in it. So pretty much the exact same array that I used up here in the save function. Let me go ahead and copy it. The only difference is going to be, this time I have an ID that I want to include as well. So let me go ahead and also include that here. Say that there's an ID, which is this object's ID, and then name, red value, green value, and blue value. So otherwise just the same as what we did before. So all of that should then go through and execute and hopefully update the actual color in the database for us. Just like with our save that we had a minute ago, the next thing I'm going to want to do then is confirm that we actually were able to save. So let me say if from my statement the row count is equal to 1. If it is, then that means that we saved successfully, in which case I could simply return true. If we couldn't save, then I'll return false instead. So the overall process becomes, we have a color, we pass that color update data. It stores that update data in itself, validates itself. It then checks to see if it is valid. If it is valid, we initialize our database. We then prepare an update statement. We execute that update statement using the values from this object. If the statement appears to have worked, we return true, otherwise false. Just noticing here, I think this false that I'm returning, I actually want to return outside that if statement because it's false that I'll also want to return if we weren't valid. Did I make that same mistake up here in my save function? Yes, it looks like I did. Let me take that false as well, move that outside that if statement. So false is what returns if we didn't successfully update our database and if the object wasn't valid. In both cases, we'll return false. So I need to go back and check out new again and make sure it still works. Update as well. So let's give that a shot. Let's hop over to the browser. I'm going to go back over to the new page. Let me try making a new color. I'm going to say white. It looks like new works just fine. If I now go over and I try to edit a color, let me try editing color test here. With no name, our validation appears to be working. Let me rename this color black, so that's my update. And it looks like that did not work. Call to undefined method PDO prepared. Oh, I think I have a typo there, line 122. On line 122, here in the update function, it looks like I typed prepared. Let me fix that and just make it prepare. Back over to the browser and refresh again, tell it to resend the data, and my black color has been renamed black. Since our test of that was interrupted here, let me give that another try. Let me try again editing that black color. I'm going to rename it to coal this time. And yeah, there we go. That worked smoothly. We were able to successfully update. We're able to successfully rename our color. Again, if you just want a sanity check, what we could do is we could hop back over to our workbench. We could execute our select all from colors table, and I can see that white has been added and the black color has been renamed to coal at this point. So everything looks like it's working just fine and dandy. The only thing we really have left at this point then to get to work is the destroy function, being able to actually delete a color. So let's go take a look at the code for that. So here's my destroy function, the way it exists currently. What we were doing was we were already creating a color object. For that color object, we were then calling the destroy method on it. The way we had it working before was it loaded all the colors. It then wiped itself out of the colors array and then saved everything that was left. Here, what we'll do with destroy is let's just start off by connecting to our database or making sure that we are connected with our initdb function. Then we're going to need to execute a query. Let me go ahead and just wipe out some of the rest of this. None of that's really going to do us much good at this point. So let me go ahead and create a query. My query this time, again, I'm going to want to substitute in a value. So even though this is going to be a delete query that I'm executing that won't ever return a value, I'm going to want to substitute in an ID. So I'm still going to use a prepared statement for it. So let me say create a statement by going to my database connection, calling prepare, which I will endeavor to spell correctly this time. The actual query I'm going to write is going to be delete from colors where ID equals, and then I'll use a named placeholder to actually put that ID into place. Next, let me go to my statement. Let me call the execute function for it. And in its execute function, I'm going to need to pass it an array where I'm going to specify what ID I want to have deleted. And in this case, the ID will be the ID for this color. So for this color's ID, execute that delete statement, which should then wipe this color out. I can then double check and make sure that it actually did get wiped out. I'm going to say if that statement has a row count, which is the number of affected rows here, if it has a row count of 1, then that means that it succeeded. So we can at that point return true. If anything happened to go false in there, or if anything happened to go wrong, then we'll return false. So whoever called the destroy function will know that things did not work out. Let's see how it works. Back over in the browser, here we are. If I wanted to get rid of my white color, let me try hitting its destroy link. It looks like things broke a little bit. Color class on line 136. Let's see what I did wrong there. 136 in my color class is my line here where I'm putting together my statement. Oh, it looks like I missed one of the colons. Instead of doing self colon colon, I just had one colon there. So let me put in the second colon. Back over in the browser, I'll refresh, and it looks like white is gone. Let's try it again here on coal. Gone is gone. So that looks like it does the trick. So we have now updated our color class so it is no longer using a flat file, but is instead going through and storing and working with manipulating all of our color data in a database instead. Working with the database this way certainly has some benefits to it. I don't know if I would say that the code that we have here in our color class now is simpler or not. Some people might think that working with the flat file was a little bit more straightforward. Either way, there is a certain size limit, I would say, that you have to honor when you're dealing with flat files. Flat files work fine at very small scales for little convenience type scales, but eventually we grow up and we have to start dealing with databases. On the other hand, I generally don't throw databases at every single problem. Databases themselves have some disadvantages. It is another piece of software that has to be run, another piece of software that has to be updated and maintained. It is a potential other source of problem. Now, not only do we have to worry about keeping our PHP working, but we have to make sure that we actually keep our database server working as well. So databases aren't something, like I said, that I use all the time for every single problem. But when you do grow to a certain scale where you're working with particular volumes of data, where you need certain levels of performance, databases are the direction you generally need to turn. So it's nice that we have them available, and hopefully this is a pretty decent example of showing you how we can work with one in order to get some good work done.